Welcome back to DWeb Decoded, a podcast by Filecoin Foundation that explores the intersection of blockchain and the data economy. I'm your host, Aaron Stanley, and today I'm joined by David Johnston, who's a longtime friend of the Filecoin world and an open source contributor to the Morpheus Project. So today we're going to be talking about Morpheus, which is a project that is at the bleeding edge of the decentralized AI movement. So David, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Hey Aaron, good to see you. Glad to be here, man.
Awesome. So David, I know a lot of folks in the Filecoin world may know you. You've been around for a while in various capacities, even back to Bitcoin, Ethereum days, and you've described yourself as a freedom tech entrepreneur, which I find that term quite endearing. But I'm hoping you can tell us maybe a bit what you mean by that, and also maybe give yourself a quick introduction, like what you've been working on over the last 10, 15 years in your involvement in crypto.
Sure. Been in tech since the early internet. Even did an AI project back in 2012 and realized I was way too early in that trend, but went full-time in crypto in 2012, 2013. I guess probably most people know me for writing the paper on decentralized applications. So if you know dApps, I wrote a framework for it in 2013, sort of caught on as an idea, but it was like, hey, there's all these great things about Bitcoin. It's open source, peer-to-peer, has a blockchain, and has its own token, right? And I think that was the breakthrough of Satoshi, is the software could pay for its own hardware, right? And so it became persistent, and independent, and censorship resistant. And so I was like, that's a great generalized model, not just for Bitcoin, but for any project that wants to embrace this ethos of freedom and decentralization, right? So yeah, that idea caught on, and I've had the opportunity to contribute to the first, second layers, on Bitcoin and Ethereum. I reviewed the Ethereum white paper. I've, been a big fan of the idea of smart contracts, kind of helped meme that into existence. And, more recently, it felt like there was a missing term for this intersection of AI and crypto in like 2023. And so I wrote a paper on smart agents, right? An agent that can connect to a wallet and use smart contracts, right? That seemed like the next big breakthrough. And then I saw the Morpheus white paper come out. The Anons published it September 2nd last year. And I was like, yep, this is the way. It needs to be a decentralized network. It needs to have its own token. It should use a fair launch, lined up with all the like early crypto ethos of the early Bitcoiners. And, I talked to Eric Voorhees about it and a bunch of others. And they're like, yeah, this is going to be really important. If we don't have decentralized AI, a lot of the rest of the stuff doesn't matter, right? Because if all the intelligence is flowing through these AI systems, and at the time they were super centralized, especially around OpenAI, right, which isn't open source and basically sold out to Microsoft, right? It wasn't looking pretty good. So it really rallied the community in late 2023 to start like, okay, we got to seriously open source and decentralize this stuff right now. So it's been a wild ride the last few years.
Yeah. And I'm really excited to dive into the Morpheus project. Not just the genesis of the project, which is super interesting, but then how you guys have been developing. You just launched a mainnet fairly recently. But first, I'd like to get a brain dump from you on kind of like why all this stuff is necessary. And you hinted at this just a moment ago, but you've been tracking pretty closely like a lot of the various kind of regulatory developments, and there's been a lot of kind of like lobbying from kind of like big AI industry now, I guess, if we can call that a thing. Yep. And there's just a lot going on now that I think people don't really like fully, or maybe have not fully appreciated like the severity or like the seriousness of some of this, and what some of these proposals might mean. So hoping you could kind of give us an update on just like what's the state of this right now, and why at this point in December 2024 do we like need decentralized AI?
Well, it's looking a hell of a lot better than it did last December. Mark Andreessen recently covered this and kind of like blew the lid off a lot of this stuff in that Joe Rogan podcast, where he talked not only about the debanking that was going on in crypto, but the AI centralization, right? So switch back to October of 23, Microsoft, OpenAI, Google, they basically lobbied the administration to do an executive order. And they used all this safety language, but it was basically a regulatory capture move, right? Where anybody that wanted to do AI was going to have to KYC people for data centers. They were going to put a cap on how large the models could be. They were going to consider open source potentially dual use weapons, a la 1990s crypto wars, right? About whether encryption was a weapon or whether it was math.
Yeah, and this is the whole Phil Zimmerman, printing the code on his shirt and wearing it across board. This is that whole ordeal, right?
And so basically, the Morpheus community is like, forget about this. Like, we're going to pull a Zimmerman. We're going to open source this stuff as fast as possible. And we ended up having a lot of allies that we didn't expect. So Meta, for example, right? Zuckerberg started open sourcing his models, right? Llama 1 was leaked. And then Llama 2, they officially released, as open source. And then Llama 3, you're even allowed to fine tune, and they've got it more and more sort of open and liberal as far as what you can do with the models. But those models that Llama, Meta ended up releasing were just as good as ChatGPT 4. So the technical moat has gone away, right? The open source models have caught up 100% with the closed and proprietary models. And so now the open source is really at the leading edge, which makes sense. OpenAI put out this narrative like, oh, we have all the GPUs, we have all the money, nobody can compete with this. It's nonsense. Like, you look at the amount of GPUs that were mining Ethereum before it switched to proof of stake is 50 times as many as trained ChatGPT 4. So crypto has compute. Like, we have the largest compute networks in the world. What are you talking about? These GPUs aren't sitting in a silo inside of a couple of big companies. Most of the world's GPUs are owned by the crowd, by the open source community, by companies all over the world. And so when you think of them in aggregate, they're much larger than any one company. So that's what's happening is people have sort of broken that spell and realized, no, there isn't a big moat. The money doesn't matter. The best talent is in open source anyway. And so we've gotten to the point where the new regime is tweeting out, the vice president-elect is saying the solution is open source AI, right? And if you want to fight, like, to see an authority figure say that like a year later is crazy. But the fight is still ongoing in every jurisdiction in the world, right? China has banned OpenAI. So if you were using AI there, you're no longer using a Western model, right? So what are they going to use? They're going to use all the open source models. The EU passed their EU AI Act right about the same time as the executive order in the US. And it basically said, if you don't follow all these rules and implement all of this, controls at a model level, like you're not allowed in the EU. So Meta has said they're not going to release Llama 4 in the EU. But the weights are open source. So I don't know what that means. Like, you can download it anywhere, but it won't officially be allowed in the EU. And they've sort of shot themselves in the foot. The only meaningful AI company in Europe is Mistral, which fortunately is open source. So it's basically funded in collaboration with the French government. And so they've got their European model, which they're trying to protect. But open source is effectively won at this point. NVIDIA is releasing open source models. Google just released their new alpha folding model for proteins. So like, the tide has really shifted from last year. So the community's been very successful pushing back and saying open source is important. This is the only way the technology is going to be safe, because the risk is a few centralized actors have control of this intelligence instead of the decentralized crowd all having access to this intelligence at the same time. So, we've seen a lot of success, but we're just getting started, right? This next wave is going to be agents, right? We're already seeing Truth Terminal and virtuals and all these, Theoric and all these cool agents being released, mostly around like memes and fun stuff like that. But that's just like the tip of the iceberg. Like, people are going to start powering these with decentralized compute from Akash and Hyperbolic and all these networks. And what just went live, as you alluded to, is the Morpheus mainnet for compute, right? So Morpheus is not running any GPUs. It's just a marketplace. It's a router that connects people that want to host GPUs on, say, Akash, and somebody like Venice who wants to use those GPUs to host an AI model, right? It's connecting those two sides, the people supplying the GPUs and the people demanding the AI inference, right? And it's connecting those two. So you can think of Morpheus really as a demand-side generator, as a marketplace that connects these things and rewards the people involved, right? It's best compared to like an Ethereum. Like, Ethereum Foundation's not writing smart contracts, right? Uniswap and Compound, all these things were developed independently. It gave people the EVM. It gave people solidity and the consensus layer and an execution layer. And that's what Morpheus is for smart agents. It's that platform, that neutral infrastructure that anybody can use.
That's fascinating. Thank you for all that. There's sort of like probably 4 or 5 things in there that I want to dive into, double click on a bit further. Sure. But this idea that like the open source moat has, or the moat that the big tech, the big AI companies had, has effectively, even just a year or two later after the release of these, I think we're hitting the 2-year anniversary of ChatGPT now, right? And even just 2 years later, the open source models have already effectively caught up. I was not aware of that for once. I'm very encouraged to hear that. And I think I myself, and I think a lot of other people have kind of, you kind of succumb to this doomerism of like, oh wow, this, like Sam Altman, he's got like unlimited capital, unlimited GPUs, like unlimited power, like all these, like how are we ever going to compete with what these guys are doing? And what you're coming here and saying like, well, look, like this isn't just like, we're actually are currently out competing these guys on question of performance, on cost. Maybe talk a bit more about how is it, like how has that moat been like just erased or like just filled in like so quickly? Like that's, because I just find that so fascinating how we've moved so quickly.
Well, think about a cutting edge researcher. They want to work on the most interesting things. And unfortunately, Google and a lot of these proprietary players stopped publishing their research 3 or 4 years ago. And it was under the guise of safety, but call it proprietary protectionism. But they said, no, don't publish this stuff. We're going to keep it internal, right? And there's this weird period. Google was way ahead in AI, but they got into this mode of, no, we don't want to publish what we're doing. And they kind of didn't release a product. And ChatGPT came out and sort of blew the lid off of everything. And the models were a lot better than people appreciated that they had gotten to. And they moved faster and sort of displaced Google's lead with DeepMind. But think about that. The best researchers want to work on the best stuff. And if it's inside the 4 walls of a company, it's not the best stuff because you can't even tell your buddies or the other researchers or the people working at the edge about what you're doing. Then it's very discouraging, right? So the energy has moved into the open source community. And it's not just training the frontier models, it's the fine tunes, right? Look at Noose Research and people improving the open source model. If it's open source, 1,000 other researchers can make their own version and fine tune it and improve it and try to come up with new techniques. And so you have all this collaboration that doesn't exist in the proprietary world. All that energy moved in to the open source, right? And add in the token incentives, right? Between BitTensor and Akash and Morpheus and others, there's $10, $20 billion of token value, depending on how you measure it, whether you include the meme coins and stuff like that, in decentralized AI right now. And those resources keep coming. And they're funding these hyper efficient GPU runners all over the world. Right. And it's like, how did Bitcoin become so big? You could run hash power anywhere, right? That's what's happening with AI models is you don't have to run it in a data center in Virginia. It can be anywhere in the world, right? And somebody's got some unused capacity, which like 30% of all data centers are underused. They can point that capacity at these type of use cases, get paid cross borders seamlessly with crypto from anywhere. Like that's really powerful. If you look at Akash, for example, and their H100s are like $1 an hour. Compare that to Amazon. I think they go for 4 or 5, right? So it's already significantly cheaper just because you've created this free market than a cloud. Like the clouds charge a huge premium. You're talking 50 to 80% profit margins. Like AWS drives most of the margin of Amazon as a company. Right. And ironically, Jeff Bezos used to say that, his competitor's margin was his opportunity. Well, now his margin is decentralized AI's opportunity. Right. So it sort of flipped the script. So, that's what's happening. It's really amazing to see the momentum. And back to your point, the fact that Morpheus has no company and has no foundation and has no DAO has just let anybody contribute however they want. There's over 300 code contributors. everybody from, Lumerin contributing code around the compute to Layer 0 or Wormhole contributing interoperability code. Auditors compete to audit the Morpheus smart contracts and usually have a 1-week turnaround.
Wow.
Try to even find an auditor and it could be 6 months in their queue, right? And so to change the dynamic and instead anybody get rewarded for that work, right? Whether it's code or capital or compute is really revolutionary. Like you said, it very much models after what Bitcoin did with mining, right? And it goes back to, again, if the software can pay for its own hardware, its own development, its own capital, then it really moves at a speed that, traditional companies can't compete with.
That's fascinating. And let's dive into just kind of the genesis of Morpheus. We've kind of alluded to it here a little bit, but maybe talk a bit about how this all emerged. There's a white paper that surfaced in September 23. Very Satoshi Nakamoto it was just anonymous authors. We don't even know who the actual authors of this thing were.
Yeah.
And
it's actually pretty funny. They called themselves Morpheus, Trinity, and Neo. And they published the paper on September 2nd, which I noticed later is Keanu Reeves' birthday. And I was like, how long did they wait to publish this thing? I hope they didn't delay a month waiting for this, Easter egg. But, it was actually Eric that pointed that out to me when I was first telling him about the paper. So I got a copy of the paper. It got emailed, they had emailed it around to everybody in the smart agent community because there are already people running AIs locally. Right, hobbyists like me, you can run your own AI on your laptop, right? So that kind of stuff had already been ongoing, and they're like, guys, smart agents are great, local agents are great, but most people aren't going to run their own node. Look at Bitcoin and Ethereum. There's only 10 or 20,000 full nodes in the world, right? Most people don't want to run their own hardware. They just want to hit a website. They want to hit an app. So there has to be a decentralized network in order to fuel all this stuff, right? And so the paper came out in September. And then the executive order drops the next month in October. And that's what lit the fire under everybody. It's like, well, we got a solution. There's a proposal over here. Let's go build that. Yeah. And this is, something. And so the community started hosting these decentralized AI days and AI summits around all the major conferences. And everybody working in the community, whether it was a Kosh or a BitTensor or Hyperbolic, all the groups showed up to these events are how can we work together? How can we assemble all the pieces of the tech stack, right? And that's what I would sort of say is if you look from the outside, you'd think a lot of these are quote unquote competitors, but most of these projects are doing different parts of the tech stack. So for example, BitTensor is training models, right? And Noose is fine tuning them. And Akash is hosting the GPUs. And Morpheus is routing that GPU inference to somebody like Venice. And the user logs in with their Coinbase wallet, right? These are all different parts of the same tech stack that go all the way from training the model to a user sending a prompt, right? And that's been the other thing is the killer apps have come fast. I don't know if you've played with Venice.ai. It's spelled like the city, VENICE. Yep. That's Eric Voorhees' project, right? He's an early contributor to Morpheus. And he built a beautiful, seamless app. They've already hit 300,000 users, 100,000 daily actives using Venice. It is sticky. And it's only been out for a couple of months. And it's just word of mouth. People like free AI. And it's all open source models. And it's private. And it's encrypted. And it's uncensored. Great. I'm going to use that, right? Not pay $300 a year to ChatGPT. So I think we're getting close to that Linux or Android type moment where the proprietary stuff came out first, but there has to be a free, independent alternative that isn't controlled by a company or one protocol, right? And so I think that's why we're getting such the reaction.
Yeah, and I'll say I've been to a couple of these kind of DAI meetups, DAI days over the course of the last year, and it's really where I took an interest in this stuff. And I couldn't help shake. I was telling people at the time, I was like, I feel like I'm at an Ethereum meetup in 2016 or something, right? It just had this vibe of there's not really any tourists here, right? It's everybody here is a pretty hardcore person, right? And they're not just here just for the free food or something. They're here because they're serious, right? Yep. It just had this vibe of there's a lot of really smart people here doing something really interesting. I don't fully understand what it is, but
Right.
should probably be paying attention to this. So that's super, like, I think that community and like that, I think that like, it's interesting you mentioned that the executive order kind of served as like a rallying cry, basically, to like really like, okay, we have this idea, we got to execute it before the door slams on us, essentially. And the brilliant thing about this is that, as you're mentioning, right, like as with Bitcoin, like there's no company, there's no CEO of Bitcoin, I mean, you could go track down Dorian Nakamoto in Los Angeles or whatever, but like there's no, you can't just sort of, there's no one to go after, right? So even if like the worst case scenario were to occur and there is this regulatory capture that happens, and it's okay, anybody that's not Google, OpenAI, or Microsoft is like basically banned from running, our AI models. Like, who are you going to go after? Like, how are you going to stop? How are you going to stop this? Like, who are you going to go shut down? Whose door are you going to kick in? Right? There's really no way to do this, which is incredible. Which is and it has, like, it just has that like that vibe. Like, wow, like there's,
I can't imagine anything more important. Like, if you consider, okay, AI keeps doubling, and in 5 or 10 years, it's going to be 99% of intelligence. I really want to own my own intelligence. I want to have not your keys, not your AI. Like, people are going to realize it's that important, because if you don't have access to that intelligence, how do you make payments? How do you move money? How do you know where to send things? Like, you need a personal AI that is owned by you, controlled by your wallet. I don't care how smart AI gets, it's not going to break encryption. Right? The laws of thermodynamics and physics are on our side, right? There's not enough compute in the universe to break encryption, certainly, post quantum encryption, right? And so your private key is such a powerful way to say, this is what I authorize and approve for my agent that's acting on my behalf, where it's storing my prompts and my data, and it's acting in my best interest. Not some company, not some advertiser, not some government, but mine, right? That's how we get AI aligned. Is there's been all this fantasy thinking about alignment, right? I want alignment to the individual. That's the only alignment that's going to work. It's not to a group. It's not to a government. You don't want any of that tragedy of the commons. You want it aligned to the individual. And that's how you'll get the best outcome. And how do you do that? We've got 500 million people with a Web3 wallet. Right? They've got a private key. They've got a public key. We've done the hard work the last 15 years to onboard those people. That's the framework you want to use, right? Not going through some gatekeeper or owned by somebody else. So, once you realize that, you're like, oh yeah, this is going to be important. And then you say, oh, well, the agents are faster and they take away the technical barrier. This is the moment for crypto to go mainstream. Because it's like that browser or search engine moment was for the web. When you could just tell the machine what you wanted, it showed you the best websites and you clicked on a link. You didn't have to be a technical expert. You didn't have to type in IP addresses anymore. Like, that was the moment that it went from 100 million people who were fairly technical to billions of people could use the web, is when you got rid of the technical barriers. And that's what AI is doing, is AI is going to be the front end and blockchain is going to be the back end. That's how this is going to work. And that's how we get to 1 billion users in the next few years. Interesting.
I'd love for you to talk a bit more about maybe just kind of riff on your smart agents idea, kind of piggybacking on what you're just talking about here.
Sure.
And, I like this idea of like the personal AI, the personalized AI. This is all stuff that kind of makes intuitive sense. The disconnect I have in my mind is like, when I'm looking around at the market right now, you see all these, on Twitter, it's like I feel like every other influencer on Twitter is like shilling like AI, agent coins and projects of some sort. And it's just like, okay, like what is it? Like, I don't know what to make of this stuff, right? Is this real? Is this a meme? Is this like what are these even doing? But at the same time, like we're starting to see like the genesis of these AI, agents that can go and trade on people's behalf and sort of, you can, people like manipulating AI agents to go and, do things that maybe it wasn't programmed to do or whatever. But like, we're seeing the genesis of this stuff right now. So I'd love for you to maybe kind of riff on like, what does all this stuff like actually mean? When you kind of look maybe beyond some of like the hypey stuff we're seeing right now in the market, but like, what is this all like actually going to look like?
So think about it in a framework like your phone. you have an operating system, and you have apps, right? Your personal AI, Morpheus, Venice, right? You label it whatever you want, but the one you control with your wallet, that's the operating system, right? And people are releasing all these specialized agents. Those are the apps. So you want your interface, your AI to interact with these other agents, these third-party agents, right? And what we need are tools similar to what search engines provided, right? They took all the noise and they ranked them, right, according to quality, and the number of links and stuff like that. But in this context, it's like amount of transactions and whether it's been audited. There's a lot of other metrics you can look on chain to know whether it's the real smart contract from Lido or whether it's something somebody released 5 seconds ago, right? So a lot of the work that Morpheus is doing is around discoverability, ranking agents, connecting them to users who want to use them, right? Because what you want to do locally is detect intent. Okay, I want to do X. My agent's like, great, I understand what you want to do. You want to stake some Ethereum? Cool. I'll go find you an agent, let's say the Lido agent, and it's ready to do that. Here you go. I presented you with the transaction. Is this how much you want to stake? Confirm by hitting the button on MetaMask, right? That's the flow, right? A user providing intent, the agent doing all the technical work, and then the user acting as the oracle at the end and approving what they actually want to do, right? So that's what you're seeing is this Cambrian explosion. And it's starting with memes and fun stuff like that. But it's every microservice, app, and smart contract you can imagine is going to get wrapped by a smart agent because it's such a simple interface. You can talk to the machine and tell it what you want to do. I don't want it to learn another smart contract. I don't want it to learn another app. I don't want to navigate or download a new thing. I just want to tell it what I want to do, right? And so now that we have this detection of intent, right, we can understand what the user's trying to do with natural language, right? They just put in a prompt and say what they want to do. Then you can close that technical gap, right, and make it super easy for people to use. So that's what's starting to happen, and so smart agents in the Morpheus context is 3 things, right? Every builder needs capital to build it. They need code, right, to hook it all together, and they need compute to run it, right? And that's the same reason people use the App Store. The developer releases there so they don't have to set up credit cards or run their own servers or handle all of the complexity. They can just ship some code, right? So the same model's happening here with smart agents. It's like, great, you want to do a launch? Here's the smart contracts for a fair launch. Oh, you need all the connections to Coinbase's wallet? Great, here's all the connections to the Coinbase wallet. Oh, you want to run this persistently? Not with a credit card on ChatGPT, but just deposit some more tokens and have access to inference forever? Great. Here's all the compute you need. So that's the building blocks that Morpheus has been putting in place for the benefit of builders who want to create all this project. So if you go to more.builders, mor.builders, you'll see like 40 plus projects that are already building on Morpheus, either using the capital or the compute. Over $1 billion has already gone through the capital contracts for other people doing fair launches based on what Morpheus created, right? If you know Arweave, they've used it, Nounspace, a bunch of others, and to give to credit, like this is building on the shoulders of giants, right? IPFS is right at the heart of the Morpheus router, right? And the registry and everything that's going on here. So you have persistent connection to storage. So, all these pieces are coming together. You couldn't have built this 2 or 3 years ago, but now we have all the building blocks.
That's so interesting. We're gonna have to do a follow-up episode on this because we're running out of time here and there's still way more to talk about. But maybe like 2 quick questions here before we wrap up this episode. I was hoping you could maybe give us a really high level of like how the token works. Like I know around the original launch, folks were like staking. You stake your staked ETH, and then if you're staking the staked ETH, like you're earning the more token, and then the ETH, the yield generated from that staked ETH goes toward. I don't know if you explain like just how that works. How do folks actually earn the token, basically?
Sure.
And then what's like the role of the token in the ecosystem?
Mm-hmm. So basically there's 4 buckets. 24% of the more token emissions go to capital providers, code providers, compute providers, and builders, right? And I really like that model because it basically rewards the entire tech stack, right? From people providing the staked ETH, like you said, who are earning more tokens, and their yield is going into protocol and liquidity. So there's no treasury, there's no DAO, nobody's holding anybody's money. All that yield, 100% of it, goes to buying tokens out of the Uniswap pool, right? So it's providing everybody who earns the tokens liquidity for the tokens. It's a great bootstrapping mechanism. And it's a fair launch, right? There was no pre-mine. The only tokens that exist are people earning them for either providing the capital like you're describing or providing code for the reference implementation, or now Compute's live. So there's $20 million in compute rewards now available for people hosting these large language models and offering them to users, right? So we've seen a rush of people setting up compute subnets on Morpheus that they want to provide their compute and earn some of those rewards. So you've got 20 million in rewards over there for compute, 20 million that have gone to the coders, 20 million that have gone to the capital providers, all in the form of the more tokens. The last one that's going to go live is the builder awards, which I'm really excited about because it's rewarding the people building the user end applications, the dApps, the smart contracts, the smart agents, things like Venice, right? The end user is touching, because so often in crypto, it only rewards the protocol layers and it doesn't, reward the end user application builders, because that's where it ultimately tends to get captured by companies, right? As somebody builds on top of all these amazing layers, but it creates, a way that, you can't get all the way up the tech stack. So this gets all the way up the tech stack. So that's how the last 4% go to a protection fund and funds bug bounties and audits and stuff like that. But that's sort of an idea of the tokenomics. And then once you have the more token, you can stake it for inference. So you want to use the models? Great. Stake some of your more, and you get part of the daily inference that's provided to the network, right? Which is really cool, because then you can have a persistent method of supporting these smart agents. So you can deposit some more tokens and it can continue using it, and not be dependent on a credit card, on file at ChatGPT, where if, the credit card goes away, that meme coin basically dies because it won't respond anymore because its brain got turned off, right? How do you give this brain power forever to an agent, make it persistent and useful over time? This is a method to do that. So really interesting tokenomics. You basically would be able to stake more to earn towards compute providers, to builders, to all these capital rewards. So it's such an interesting use case. There's a hard cap of 42 million. There'll never be more than that as far as tokens. So it's very simple to understand economically. And it's just being emitted over 16 years. So it's a long-term project. But there's a burn function. So it'll be something less than 42 million. And it's very clever. At the end of the 16 years, it takes half are burned and half are locked. That becomes the next block reward. So you never break that 42 million, but there's always a block reward going forward for like the next 256 years.
Oh,
so
wow.
it's very well thought out. You can have a hard cap, but if you have a burn function and you lock some of it, you can always have a block reward refreshing every epoch. So it's a really interesting approach.
That's super interesting. Yeah. I definitely have a lot more questions about this that we'll get to next time. I guess
Sure.
my last question would be, how can folks get involved and support here? I mean, you've kind of outlined a number of ways, but what, if folks find this interesting, hey, I want to get involved somehow, either, maybe I have compute, maybe I have capital, maybe I have an idea for an app, maybe I'm just, somebody who doesn't have any of those things, but I just find this really interesting. How can people sort of get involved and support this?
So go to mor.org. This is one of the community websites. Eric Voorhees bought the domain and donated it to the community early on. And now it's maintained by the community, but there's great platform dashboards for each of the types. So if you've got compute, go on there, click the dashboard, and you'll see where you can become a compute provider. Or go to more.builders and you can fill out an application and say, hey, I want to join the accelerator. I want to become a Morpheus builder. There's no permission required, but it makes it easy to sort of go through the process. All that kind of stuff is available. So more.org is a great resource. There's a ton of community websites, like morelord.com has all the, info stats on all the deposits and how much money is in the system and stuff like that, kind of like a blockchain.info used to be with all the charts and everything. So yeah, it's cool to see because like you don't need anybody's permission. There's no copyright on the logos. Like where did this shirt come from? Like the community's just been making their own shirts. I've seen like 50 different versions. I know now there's like a Morpheus.Asia. There's a community in Malaysia and Southeast Asia and Singapore, and they've got their whole thing going on and they're hosting events around Morpheus. It's been cool to see them pop up in India and Ukraine and meetups all over the world. And, people are just getting together. It's like, yeah, I want to build this. I want to access these tools. So yeah, it's pretty easy to join the community. Amazing.
Well, hey, yeah, this is super interesting stuff, David. Really appreciate you coming on to tell us about it. Definitely need to do another round of this because there's a lot more here we can dive into. But really appreciate your time. How can folks find you personally if they want to connect or want to learn more?
Follow me on X is probably a great way to do it. It's D Johnston with a T and then EC as in Echo Charlie. So D Johnston EC is my handle on X. And I'm pretty responsive. I'm heads down just building code, and I think I've worked my way up to number 2 on GitHub. So yeah, I've dusted off my engineering hat and in there merging pull requests and reviewing stuff. But I love the Morpheus approach where each maintainer of a repository sort of acts as a judge. It's this idea of atomic governance. So again, there's no bureaucracy or votes. How do you manage it? Well, all the volunteers, especially the people that are maintaining the repos, are fielding all these requests from the community of what to update next.
Amazing. Well, hey, David, really appreciate your time. Great seeing you again here, and look forward to doing another episode with you again soon.
Sounds good, Aaron. Take care, man. Bye.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for watching. We'll see you next time on DWeb Decoded.